So, as every year, I'm so lucky to be able to introduce you a distinguished scholar. But let's say first that I thank you for your participation. I thank you, friends, colleagues, and especially students for being so many here attending the lecture, because the goal of this memorial lecture that celebrates the founder of the School of Experimental Psychology in Trieste, the main goal is to maintain alive a tradition of studies in the broad area of perception and cognition. I think, I'm not the only one, I think that this is an important area, that important contributions have been made in Trieste, in northern Italy, and for this reason, we think that it is a good idea to attract the attention of students to recent developments. And for this reason, I'm really grateful to Professor Ekroll, who accepted to be our speaker this year. He knows a lot about a part of this area, perception and cognition, the interface between the two. The way the two areas, in some sense, can overlap or are divided by a contour that sometimes is very fuzzy. And it is the fuzziness of this border between perception and cognition that makes it so attractive as an area of research for many people, for many researchers. And Kanizsa, the celebrated Kanizsa, was one of those scholars deeply interested in this fuzzy border. He had a position. Maybe over the years, he also changed his position about the exact location of this border between the two, or the amount of overlapping between perception and cognition. For this reason, as I said, we are grateful to Vebjørn, is the exact pronunciation? Vebjørn? Yeah, okay, for having accepted. Because especially in his recent years, he contributed in fundamental ways to our understanding of phenomena like a modal completion, and something that he introduced in the literature, the illusion of absence, that I think is really very stimulating, which is connected to an area of research that some of you already know very well, but you need to go deep into that today. Professor Ekroll started his studies in psychology in Bergen. He comes from Bergen in Norway, but he left Bergen very early, he told me, as a student to study in Kiel in Germany, in Kiel, where he got his PhD, working mainly in color perception, and also did some work on motion perception, important parametric work in apparent motion. Then he moved as a postdoc in Leuven, working with Johan Bagemans, who years ago was a lecturer here in the same occasion. And well, Leuven is not a place like that. It's an important place. It's the place where Michot introduced the term amodal presence and amodal completion in 1951. Well, the same year I was born, you know. Musatti considered himself a twin brother of psychoanalysis because they were born in the same year. I consider a modal completion a twin brother of myself because I was born in the same year, like a modal completion. Well, the term amodal was introduced in 51. Yeah. Okay, having said that, I live, and now, now I was forgetting, he's back in Bergen, at the University of Bergen as a professor, studying, as I said, a lot of interesting stuff in basic research, but also with some applied interests. And in this magical talk, he will be able to fuse the two things together. So the interest for basic problems in the area of psychology, perception, and cognition, and applied research, fusing them together, which is also something that may interest us deeply. So thank you very much. And
thank you so much, Dr. for this kind introduction, and thank you to the organizers. It's a really pleasure to be here, and honored to come. I would like to talk about research on topic at the beginning, and then as we go along, focus more on aim of nutrition. So if you think about, to look at research on magic in the history of psychology, there is this French theory. There was almost no research on magic quite about time, CTA, sorry. This is the year, and this is the number of publications on experimental investigations of magic. There has been very little research on magic within academic psychology until about 2005, 2006, 2008. There it seems to explode. So why has there been so little research on the question? And we see an increasing trend, and an interesting question is, does this has any actually, or does it have job it would be substantial? And I think the answer is yes. So here are two key papers that are really, let's say, fairly instrumental in starting this movement of research. Madly, first one first was by Jason Kuhn, and the second one by Stephen Glick, and say, show this, I think, what that she is. Yeah. So why is that you use math? I think we can use technology. Yeah. Better now. Helps. And the increasing body factors on the cable probably.
Was too much, huh? This better? Not a little bit too much. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, right, that you can use magic as a touchstone perception for psychology, and I think you can say that our current scientific knowledge of perception and cognition is insufficient for understanding how magic works. And we can also identify gaps in our understanding. We can also identify gaps in our scientific understanding and fill them by investigating what magicians do and why it works. So ideally, you can think about psychology as the basic science that can explain how the applied art of magic works. But this ideal picture doesn't seem to describe the situation the way it would. If you ask, do magicians use knowledge from academic psychology? I think the answer to that is mostly not, maybe in rare cases. They don't normally study psychology to become magicians. You can ask, do psychologists understand how magic works? And I think in many cases, the answer is probably not a lot. Even I, I've studied this for quite some time, have a lot of things that I don't understand about it, being a psychologist. And then you can ask an even more provocative question. Do magicians know how magic works? So many people, when I tell them that I do research on magic as a psychologist, they respond by saying, why don't you simply ask a magician? They know for sure. But an important point that I would like to demonstrate to you is that it's quite possible to do magical things without really understanding how it works on a deeper level. And that's where we as psychologists have interesting questions to ask, to address. So I'd like a demonstration with you. So you all have received a little strip of paper and 2 paper clips. So I would like you to take that. So here is a money bill, the paper. So please try to fold it in the way as this dollar bill is folded. So you take the paper, fold it about in 1/3, take one of the paper clips and attach it like that. And then you fold it the other way, about 1/3, the opposite direction, and then you fasten the second paper clip there. So there's one paper clip putting together 2 parts here, and the other 2 parts are put together by this side. So now I'll show you. I'll show you a small video. To show you what happens when you do that. But once you've done this, you can pull the parts, the ends apart and see what happens. What happened to the paper clips? Now, if you did it correctly, they should be linked together. So this effect, I think, is quite astonishing if you manage to do this now. And if it happened when you did it, you probably have no idea how that happened. It's like something magical happened. So this trick, I think, illustrates now you are the magician, but you probably have no idea how this happened. And even more importantly, you probably have no idea why you experience it as possible. And that's the sort of question that we as psychologists try to answer by doing research. The big question for us is, why do people experience things as impossible? So I'll look at a few things that contribute to that today, like inattentional blindness and amodal completion, and also a newer phenomenon that we call the illusion of absence. Inattentional blindness is well known in the literature, and the link to magic is quite well understood. Amodal completion is also well known in the literature, in no small part thanks to Kanizsa. But the link to magic has been less clear, but we've tried to elucidate that. And then I'll talk a little bit about the illusion of absence, which is newer, something which is new in cognitive science because we study magic. And I think there's even more to other phenomena that are interesting in the same way. Inattentional blindness, amodal completion, and so on, they are important factors in magic, but the most important thing is the illusions or the failures of metacognition or meta-perception that are linked to those phenomena. So I'll try to clarify that a little bit as we go along. A demonstration of inattentional blindness. This is Gustav Kuhn performing a little trick. Where did the cigarette go? Now we looked at the video a second time. He simply drops the cigarette in his lap. Did you see it now? So interestingly, what happens here is that Gustav misdirects our attention, and we don't notice that he actually lets the cigarette fall into his lap. It's in full view. The second time we view it, most people see it. And then it's very surprising, how could I miss that? And that's the failure of metacognition. We have the experience that we see everything clearly, but we don't, due to inattentional blindness. This is an illustration of something that magicians often say: you should never repeat the same trick twice, because then people will figure it out. So now, amodal completion. I'd like to do a demonstration of a magical trick based on amodal completion. We have a very long rope, a very short rope, and a medium rope. Now the ends, as you can see, they are equally long, right? And these ends are also equally long, huh? So that makes the ropes equally long, as you easily can see, right? They are now equally long. So you might think I do some sleight of hand, but I can tie the ropes together, so there's no possibility. A short rope, a long rope, and a medium rope. This is the Gestalt principle of good continuation. If we put these two objects together, we suddenly get this, which is organized in a completely different way. And thanks to the principle of good continuation, we see a square wave and a round wave. In this trick, the main ingredient is this. And I cover that. You see two equal ropes, but it's really like this. The principle of good continuation. And also important here is this failure of visual metacognition that we have here. Our system makes us see more, see this. See more than we think is possible. We see the hidden parts. And the important thing here, completion. Years in this field were, of course, Kanizsa and Michot. Here we see a demonstration by Kanizsa. On the top, we have three octagons, and we cover some corners. And then suddenly in the middle, we see a completely different shape, more like the shape over there. And this is interesting because even though we know it's an octagon behind the occluder, it still changes the shape when we put the occluders in place. So, and here also you have the principle of good continuation operating locally. Here is a similar demonstration by Albert Michot. If we cover up this triangle, suddenly you see a regular triangle, even though you know what's behind it. And if we cover up this, now you see a cross, even though you know it's not a cross. And this shows that amodal completion is cognitively impenetrable. Your knowledge doesn't influence your perceiving. So the phenomenon of amodal completion demonstrates that our visual system makes us see hidden things. That's a very important point I would like to drive home today. And like most other visual the illusions based on amodal completion are cognitively trouble. It doesn't depend on what you know or expected or would like to see. As this demonstration from Kanizsa shows, and also this demonstration shows, here you have the impression of a very long finger It's just two fingers covered by a box. And even though you know it cannot be a long finger, and that you still see the long finger. So I mentioned you should never repeat the same trick twice, but there might be a qualification to that. Now, if we have this theory that amodal completion is cognitively impenetrable, it's visual perception, not thinking, then you would expect that tricks that are based on that, you can repeat them as much as you want, and they should be powerful and robust to repetition. So we investigated that. So the prediction we can repeat, and the tricks should be strong. So here, this is from a study where we showed people videos of different tricks, and we showed them 3 times. And after each time, we asked them, what do you think is the secret behind this trick? And we recorded how many times how many of them were able to figure this out. After 1 presentation, after 2 presentations, and after 3 presentations. And you see the red tricks here. Those are things based on attention and similar things. Here, you see a strong increase, and also it's easier to figure out these tricks. The blue data are tricks based on amodal completion. You see, it's very difficult to figure out how these tricks work, even when you repeat them several times. So this confirms the prediction and indicates that amodal completion is indeed cognitive, and tricks based on amodal completion are indeed cognitively impenetrable. We can also have amodal completion in 3D space. Here you see a little trick based on that. Suddenly there is a new ball. How does that work? Well, it's actually quite simple. It's just this and this. You take the ball out, you put this on. It's an empty shell, but it looks like a complete ball. And it's a very convincing illusion. And since it is such a convincing illusion, you can make strong magic with this children's toy. You might have seen a trick called multiplying balls. You have here a ball, and then the magician suddenly has 2 balls. How does that happen? Well, it's just an empty shell. The interesting thing is, if you look at this, it doesn't look like two half shells. It looks like 2 balls. And this is, you sort of see the backside of the ball. And this is what makes this kind of trick very powerful. You can see in this demonstration, just lifting this off the table, you can see how it grows into a ball perceptually. This is amodal volume completion, which is known in the literature from before. And we asked what would happen. Now you look at it, it looks like a ball. What happens if you put your finger in it? Surely then the illusion must go away, right? You can feel it's hollow. I invite you to try it out. You've all received a shell. It's best if you try it with the middle finger like this and hold it close to your body and extend the other 2 fingers. Now, if you look at the ball, and then you try to think about where do you feel that the tip of your finger is located. And if you have the impression that your finger is further away from you than the 2 other fingers, then you are experiencing the illusion, because, of course, the middle finger is longer than the 2 others. So it's a good idea to hold it close to your body and look at it directly from above. So now, many of you might have this illusion that your finger feels shorter than it actually is. It does not work very well if you have long fingernails, and there are some individual differences here. We measure this. This is Johan Wagemans, my postdoc supervisor in the pilot experiment. So he has a stick here where he points to where he feels that the tip of his finger is. So we measured that in experiments, and on average, and we did it with different sizes of the shell, and on average, with this measurements, that the finger is shortened to an extent which corresponds to roughly 1/3 of the diameter of So this finger illusions illustrate several interesting things. It expands also on a very important idea that Kanizsa introduced here with this illustration from his paper, Seeing and Thinking. You can see here these parts of the car. When you complete them in your mind, and that happens immediately when you look at this, the background is pushed forwards. And this shows that amodal completion has functional consequences within perception. In much the same way, our illusion here of seeing a complete ball has consequences for your perception of your finger. So it will have consequences. Percept coupling, one aspect of perception influences another aspect of perception in a logically linked way. This also shows that perceptual representation of your body and body parts, they are very malleable. That's known from a lot of research. It also illustrates that vision often dominates over other senses, and that's known from a lot of research. But the interesting bit here is that the visual perception of something that you cannot see because it's on the backside. So that illustrates how important amodal completion is. Now here is a related, slightly different phenomenon, which we call the illusion of absence. If you look at this picture, you might have the compelling impression that it's a table with nothing on it. If we remove the violet occluder, you can see there's a lot of different fruits in there. And even if you know that they are there, you have a very compelling impression. It's difficult to imagine that they are there. And this is what we call the illusion of absence. So this illusion of absence is both similar and different from amodal completion. Amodal completion was investigated started more than 50 years ago. The pioneers were Kanizsa and Michaud. It's what completion is cognitively impenetrable. You have a curious sense of, like, you have a very strong feeling that the finger behind this box is actually there. And most explanations appeal to some variant of the idea of good continuation, the law of good continuation. Whereas the illusion of absence is only recently described. We have some evidence now that it is also cognitively impenetrable. But here you have a curious sense of absence rather than presence. And good continuation cannot be evoked as an explanation. You can have good continuation of the table that makes you see a complete table, but the impression that there's nothing behind the table and the occluder, that you cannot explain with the good continuation. So the illusion of absence plays an important role in many different ways in magic. So it plays a role in illusions of levitation, but it also plays an important role when things appear out of nowhere or disappear into thin air. So I'll try to illustrate that. If you look at this movie, you might have the impression of a ball that floats in space, but it's really just a long stick. So here you can see that the experience of levitation is linked to the experience of empty space. If something is levitating, it means it must be surrounded on all sides by empty space. So by perceiving empty space here, although it's not empty space, you induce the illusion of levitation. I'll try to do a demonstration. Get this card to levitate. I have to use some psychophysical force. Can you see how it's floating? There is something behind, right? But when it's there, you have a strong impression that you see that it's floating. And that's because you see that empty space behind it. In magic, things can seem to appear out of nowhere. And mostly, when they appear, they come from an object just next to where they come from. How could it be otherwise? But still, it looks like it appears out of nowhere. And that reason for that, our theory, is that you perceive the space behind the object that covers it as empty. And you can also make things disappear by hiding them behind things where the space is perceived as empty. They disappear into nothingness. Look at this again. It's hidden behind this finger. It's already there. It disappeared. So things can just come out of nowhere. That's how magic works. So Mats Vebjørn investigated this. What we wanted to know here is this illusion of absence in magic tricks cognitively impenetrable, in much the same way as the previous experiment. And here we see the data. We did tricks based on amodal completion and tricks based on amodal absence. And for those tricks, they're difficult to figure out, and you can repeat them several times. Whereas other tricks based on attention and reasoning, we see that it's much easier after. So how can we explain this amodal absence or this illusion of absence if we cannot invoke the Gestalt principle of good continuation? The explanatory framework we're investigating now, here the idea is something called the principle of generic views. The principle is quite simple. It's illustrated here based on Ames' car demonstration. So here we have two different configurations, one on top and one on bottom, photographs from three different angles. At a certain viewing angle, they look almost identical. Although on top, the picture card is in the back, and here below, it's in the front. We see here that the picture on the retina, what you see directly here, is almost identical. Now, if you see something like this, which of the two possible interpretations should you choose? You can choose both, but the visual system prefers the interpretation that does not involve a huge amount of coincidence, that it's not, you don't look at it from a special angle. So if you have this, you see this, and you would interpret it as this, that would imply that you view it from a very special angle. If you interpret it as this, it's not a special angle. And the visual system avoids this. So that's the principle of generic views, which has been introduced and discussed by several different authors in slightly different ways. This is also related to Irving Rock's avoidance principle. There, the idea is simply that the visual system avoids interpretations that involve a high degree of coincidence. So if we want to apply this to the illusion of absence, we can think of an occluder here and a hidden object. And the gray here is the area that the blind zone, the area that you cannot see. In this case, with a relatively narrow occluder, the hidden object would become visible if you just move your head a little bit. With the broader occluder, like here, you could move your head quite a lot. So this would be a highly non-generic view or accidental view, and this would not be so accidental. This we can derive the prediction that the illusion of absence should be stronger on occur for narrow occluders. So we have three studies that have tested this prediction. I'll focus on the two latest ones, but they all point in direction. So Melika Merilam did investigate this using this setup, a stick in the back, resting on a pedestal, and people put their head in this chin rest. And then there is an occluder. In this case, it's transparent, but we also used opaque occluders of different sizes. And the idea here is that having this occluder should give the illusion of absence of the pedestal and make this stick appear like it's floating. Like it's floating in these pictures. It seems to be different if you view it in real life. So the sense of depth that you have in a real scenario seems to favor the illusion. And here we have, so in Melika's study, we varied the width of the occluder in 5 steps, and also we asked people to view it with both eyes or with one eye. When you view it with one eye, the sense of depth is somewhat reduced. And here you see the results, different sizes of the occluder, widths of the occluder on the x-axis, and the strength. We asked people, how strong do you feel that the impression of floating or levitation is on a scale from 0 to 10? And the impression is strongest for the narrow occluder. And here to the right, you see a control condition, the transparent one, which you wouldn't expect. So that we just had that to check that people don't just say that it floats because they want to satisfy us. We can see that the results, the tendency to perceive it as floating is somewhat reduced in a binocular. So depth perception influences the strength of the illusion, which also explains why this illusion doesn't look very good when you look at it on a photograph. This is just the posteriors for the parameters that we estimated, which shows that the dependence on width is a robust finding, and the dependence on viewing condition is also robust, and there is no clear evidence for an interaction. We have also investigated the illusion of absence in more direct ways. This is studied by Pierre Pascal and Foster. What Pierre Pascal did was he used 3 different occluders, and in addition to one that is full, here you have a different amount of open areas to covered areas. So this translates roughly to the width of the occluder. And then he presented the occluder and then removed it, revealing one piece of fruit behind it. And then asked participants, how easy is it for you to imagine that the fruit is hidden behind the occluder? And also, how likely do you think it is that it was hidden behind the occluder? The results to both of these questions were almost identical, it turned out, in the data. And what we see is that for the small occluders, where it's essentially a thin occluder, it's difficult to imagine. And people don't regard it as likely, which means you have an illusion of absence. And the illusion of absence gets weaker as you move towards the full occluder. So we have 3 different studies here, and they all agree in indicating that the illusion of absence is reduced when you have wider occluders. Now, an important idea that we're pursuing now is that if this illusion of absence is important in magic, but we think that it can also have important effects in traffic accidents. So I'll try to illustrate that idea now. So it's well known in the research on traffic safety that car drivers involved in accidents often report that another road user just seemed to appear out of nowhere. And this type of accident is called looked but failed to see accidents. So one way in which you can explain these looked but failed to see accidents is by appealing to inattentional blindness. So people are busy with something when they drive, they're looking for something, and then something comes to which they are not attending to, so they don't notice it. And you have this impression, you have this area of your visual field where you're not attending, you're essentially blind there. And when something comes out from that area where you're inattentive, and you notice it, it's like it's appear out of nowhere. So that inattentional blindness is a good explanation for this kind of accident. But another interesting explanation that could also explain maybe some of these cases is that the other road users came from an area that was invisible due to occlusion. And because we experience this area, the blind zone, as empty, when it comes into view, it's like the other road users comes out of nowhere. So there are very many different scenarios where the illusion of absence may be involved. Here illustrated, it could happen in a static scenario. So this was an incident where a motorcycle was hidden behind this small sign here. You can see it almost covers a big bus or a big trailer, so it can easily cover a motorcycle driver from the point of view of the driver. So there can be small occluders inside it, and small occluders are particularly interesting because our research suggests that small occluders are particularly strong in evoking the illusion. But you can also think about small occluders in the vehicle, like the A-pillar next to the windscreen here. So with the small occluders outside of the vehicle here, you can see the blind zone for this produced by this sign for a car standing here. So the motorcycle was covered for more than 150 meters there. And if the driver had the impression there's nothing there, he might have felt it's safe to go into the road. Occluders in the vehicle, imagine that you're in this car, you have this blind zone, another car is hidden there, you drive further, the other car is still in the blind zone. Here it's possible that you don't see the too late to brake. Here is that the illusion of absence plays a big role in magic, and it might also play a role in road safety. And the prediction here is that traffic accidents involving obstructions of view can, under some conditions, be experienced in much the same way as a magic trick. So this is a study by Shubhankar Kamak, where we tested that idea. So this is essentially what the participants in our study were viewing. But they viewed it in VR, so it's slightly different from what you see now. And suddenly there's a card apparently coming out of nowhere. And I would claim that this illusion is much stronger when you view it in VR with 3D. So what Shubhankar did, he varied the width of the occluder, or the A-pillar, in 4 different steps. And after people viewed this sequence, he asked them, how surprising do you feel that the appearance of the blue car was on a scale from 0 to 10? And then asked, can you explain where the blue car came from? And if yes, he asked them, please describe how you would explain. And then he gave them a map of the intersection and asked them to illustrate what had happened using toy cars. And after that, he showed them a video of a magic trick here performed by Mats Vebjørn. And this trick is also based on the illusion of absence. And after that, he asked them, how surprising do you think that the appearance of the coin was on a scale from 0 to 10? And here you see the results. Overall, for the VR scenario, the car accident, the ratings are very high. They're like 8 or 9 on average. With the broader pillars, it's somewhat reduced, but it's overall quite a strong effect. And the dotted line is the average for the magic trick. So that's even somewhat less. So the surprise with the traffic accident is even somewhat more as the magic trick. And we also asked, when we asked people to explain what happened, we asked them, do you know what happened? And less than half indicated that they could explain it. And when we looked at their explanations, are they really correct? It's even, particularly, it's less for this thin occluder here. So here we have a car coming into view from behind the windscreen pillar, is experienced in much the same way as a corresponding magic trick. The event is experienced as highly surprising, and less than half of the participants were able to figure out what had actually happened. The dependence of the A-pillar width is weaker and less clear than in the 3 other studies of the illusion of absence, but a plausible explanation for this slight inconsistency is that motion might be involved here and making the illusion of absence even stronger in this case. So, the illusion of absence the involvement of that in road accident. It's well known, of course, that obstructions of view are dangerous. If people don't see, it's a problem, right? It's a hazard. But the important point here is that if this illusion of absence happens, it can make it may inhibit appropriate caution because the driver feels certain that the blind zone is empty. So this has implication both for questions of culpability, was the driver negligent or not, and for question as what is the best countermeasure. If you think about culpability, and if we say, well, this illusion of absence, which produces strong illusions in magic tricks, if that also operates in these traffic accidents, and people experience them, these accidents, in much the same way as a magic trick, is it reasonable to expect of a driver to be prepared for a magic trick to happen? Probably not. And if you think about the potential countermeasures, you can think about road safety campaigns, educating people about this problem. You can think about changing road layout, and you can think about doing something with the vehicle design. And these different options are interrelated. And our findings suggest that this idea of teaching drivers to look out for this and be prepared for this is maybe not such a good idea. You cannot train people to expect a magic trick. And if this is not such a good idea, it's more, appears better to look at road design or changing the cars. But if you change road design, you fix one crossing. If you fix the car, you fix the problem all over the place. And if you look at the A-pillar, how it changed over time, it used to be very thin and small and not a big problem. In recent years, it's become much thicker, as you can see here. Partly because you want to protect the roof. If you fall on the other side, you want a strong support for the roof. But it produces a bigger problem for visibility. What you would want is maybe something like this, where you can see through the A-pillar. This was a concept car made by Volvo, like in around 2000, but it's still not in production. Another possibility, if you want to target the design, if you make a pillar which is wider than the eyes, you have a big blind zone. If you make a pillar that's exactly as wide as the distance between the eyes, you have a blind zone which is only 6 centimeters wide, so it cannot hide another person. So if you can reduce it down to that, you already fixed most of the problem, I think. So what I find exciting about this research is that it shows that by studying research on magic and trying to make do basic vision science based on that, you can gain some knowledge which you can apply. So you can gain insights into other applied domains. So we talked about inattentional blindness, amodal completion, the illusion of absence. But the important point here is the failures of metacognition involved. So I've been talking a little bit now about absence and presence. So I'd like to teach you a little trick. So you have 6 dots on this side, 1 on this side, 4 on this side, 3 on this side, 6 on this side, 1 on this side, 4 on this side, and 3 on this side. So, of course, it's only 5 on this side. You have to hold your hand, it looks like 6. Take it away, it looks like 4. On this side, it's 3. Take it away, it looks like 2. Put it here, 3. To do it here, it looks like 1. So when you do this, you can make this out of cardboard or whatever you want. It's really important that you hold your hand here, because if you take it away, people will see immediately. There are only 5 dots, right? It's the same thing with the 3. You really have to hold your hand there, because otherwise people will see. And if you're not careful, you'll end up with dots all over the place. So, shall we take a little break? Maybe some questions?
I have a question for a clarification. I need a clarification about the illusion of absence. You said that continuation of the table, let's forget about good, but simply the continuation of the table is not enough as a principle to explain why you feel that there is absence of objects, fruits, books, whatever. Why? This is not clear to me. Can you put the table again? Because this is a very basic point, I think. You see, so you have the table with objects, many objects. You put the occluder. It's not clear where the occluder is located in space, but it is in front. This is clear. It is in front at some distance between the observer and the table. And there is no evidence of any other object. So continuation of the flat table of the surface should be enough to explain your feeling that there are no additional objects, or not. Why? Why not?
Yes, the completion of the table means that at that distance from the observer, there is nothing. But that does not imply that at the closer distance, there's also nothing. There could be something on the table, it's closer to you. And indeed, that is what we experience, that there is nothing on the table, not in the plane of the table. Does that make sense?
This is the reason we talk about completion and not creation. We don't modally create object from nothing. We complete surfaces normally. Well, this is just an elaboration of Kafka anecdote in the courtroom. Yes. Yeah, right. So he said, well, he asks to the guy, are you sure there was no weapon on the table? Well, under the book? No. Well, there was a book on the table, and behind the book, you could have a hole with something, a gun. But nobody thinks that under this thing, there is a hole with a gun. It's simply a table with something on top, and so the table continues behind. Here, it's more or less the same situation. You have evidence that because you have the external borders visible of the table, and you fill in the surface, but you don't have any information, partial information about additional objects. So why should you create objects? It would be like you could ask, why you don't see an elephant behind me? You could see an elephant, you could see your uncle, you could see many things behind me. You don't see any of those things. Why? Maybe you see an elephant behind.
Yeah. Well, one important, I agree, there's no reason why the visual system should create anything. But the interesting observation here, I think, is not that you don't not create anything, but that it's very difficult to create. So if you want to create something with your imagery, that seems to be difficult or impeded. So one way in which you can observe that is if you just look at this unobstructed picture. So you see all the objects there, and then you close your eyes and you try to imagine the objects. It's relatively easy, but if you look at this occluder and do the same exercise and try to imagine it, it seems to be more difficult. So it's difficult to create the imagery. So that's, I think, is the important observation here. And also to the other question, in Kafka's case, it's on the table like this. But if it's like this, there is space, and that's what we try to do in this illusion. We create, yeah.
even with the eyes closed? It is not possible?
No, I think with the eyes closed, it's easy. It's much easier than when you look at this. So that therefore, I think the observation is this creates the visual illusion that there's nothing, because if you don't look, you just close your eyes, it's easier. That's the point.
And always connected with this. So I believe, so why you call it illusion of absence? So if there is nothing to be perceived there, so phenomenologically, according also to Gestalt, so there is nothing. So so there is no illusion. So why you call it illusion?
I agree. This term is somewhat of a misnomer. Originally, we used the term amodal absent to avoid that problem, but that has other problems. So we decided to go with the term illusion of absence because it's easier to understand, but it is indeed misleading because it's just as interesting when there's actually nothing there. It's the experience of nothing, how that depends on vision. That's interesting. You are right. It's a misnomer. Yes.
Is the shape of the table relevant?
The shape of the occluder? We don't know that yet. We haven't investigated. It would be interesting to do. We believe that one important thing is sort of the sense of depth. So here we have sort of a perspective photo that creates some sense of depth. That's probably important, but this is something we still have to investigate. So a lot of factors that would be interesting to investigate further. Thank you.
And of course, there are implications if you call it illusion, but that's not the point. Another aspect is that what is surprising is the size of the objects that are occluded. So I think that people are surprised to realize that behind the purple occluder, you can have so big objects. It's not only the presence, it's the size which is surprising. And do you have a theory about the size of occluded objects? Yeah.
Yeah, we have different hypotheses about that, so we don't know that yet. But so one possibility is the illusion of absence is absolute for any object, but it could be the case that actually the potential objects that the visual system excludes are only a subset of all possible, namely those which are almost as big as the occluder, and maybe it would not be so surprising for even smaller. So it could be a sort of a partial illusion of absence. It depends on the object size. So that's an interesting hypothesis that we would like to test, but we don't have data on that yet.
Sorry, just a curiosity. So it seems that these kind of illusions, like the illusion of absence, are some sort of assumption that the visual system does about what should be outside. Do you think that this assumption is something fixed and immutable, or there may be some way to change that assumption based on, I don't know, some sort of induced experience, or I don't know, just a curiosity?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's very difficult to investigate this. I think, it's almost like Kanizsa's impossible experiment, if you're familiar with that, to distinguish between the role of experience and of how we are born. In research on amodal completion, there is a lot of evidence that it's already present very early in childhood. So it could be the same here, but we simply don't know yet. It would be very interesting to investigate. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Shall we maybe go further? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So how do magic tricks work? We'll go deeper into this question. At a very general level, magic tricks work because people are unable to imagine what is really going on. So if you think about this red circle here as the things we can imagine, and the black circle as the things that are possible in the world, they're not exactly the same. And in some cases, there are things we can imagine which do not happen in reality, and that's pure fantasy. In some cases, there are things that are actually possible, but we cannot imagine them, and that's where magic happens. What are the sources of these? What are these things that we cannot imagine, that are sources of magical experiences? On the one hand, there are things about the world that we cannot imagine, and when we encounter them, we have a magical experience. In physics, there's a lot of things that are magical the first time we observe it. And then there's also things about how we perceive and think about the world, which are difficult to imagine. And that's also a very strong driver of magic. And that's what we're talking about today, so I'll ignore this other part. So things about how we perceive and think about the world, we have failures of metacognition. So our thinking about our own thinking. And that thinking is wrong, and it mostly is in very many cases. And that can be a general thing in magic that's very important. And we can have failures of visual metacognition. How we think about how perception works, visual perception, is often wrong. Then we have a third failure, which I call the failure of metacognition, which is misperceptions of our own, how we experience our own perception, that's also often wrong. And these are very potent factors in magic. Oh, yeah. So amodal completion challenges our everyday notions about what it means to see. So this was from Rob van Leer and I. We had a special issue on amodal completion, and we say, since amodal completion refers to mental experience of occluded and therefore invisible regions in a visual scene, it appears odd to conceptualize it as seeing. Yet these mental experiences tend to behave just like visual impressions in many ways. So this is the odd thing about amodal completion. It makes it really interesting scientifically, but it's also what makes it good for magic tricks. So this makes amodal completion particularly interesting from a scientific point of view. It also makes it very powerful as a factor in magic. So in this groundbreaking paper by Kanizsa, he says, seeing and thinking functions according to different rules. And he also says, the visual system, in cases in which it is free to do so, does not always choose the solution that is most coherent with the context as normal reasoning would require. This means that seeing follows a different logic, or still better, that it does not perform any reasoning at all, but simply works according to autonomous principles of organization, which are not the same principles which regulate thinking. So here it makes very clear that seeing is different from thinking. And his paper and his demonstration have been very influential in a big debate about is there a difference between seeing and thinking generally. This is from a paper by Sinon Pelishin, very interesting paper where he argues vision is fundamentally different from thinking, and it's cognitively impenetrable. And he refers to Kanizsa, and he says, particularly revealing a sample of the difference between the organizer's principles of vision and the principles of inference, he means thinking, are to be found in the phenomenon of amodal completion. And he reproduces Kanizsa's figure and here from a very interesting paper by Firestone and Scholl, where they claim, and I think they prove quite convincingly, that cognition does not affect perception. They say nobody has elucidated the empirical foundations and theoretical consequences of this observation, that to see can be different from what you think, better than Kanizsa, whose ingenious demonstrations of such conflict can, in a single figure, obliterate the worry that perception and cognition are merely folk categories. So is amodal completion seeing or thinking? So you can make a list of things where this could be criteria that distinguishes between seeing on the one hand and thinking on the other hand. And then you can look how does amodal completion confirm to these principles? And I will try to do that now, and I'll fill in the gaps here. And my claim is that if you do that, you will end up with the conclusion that amodal completion is seeing. It's not thinking. So we'll go through this slowly. The first criteria here is something that people often think about when they argue about amodal completion. Does amodal many people say that amodal completion involve indirect inferences based on sensory input. Indirect inferences is like thinking, but that's also how vision generally works. And many people say, well, it's not based on direct sensory stimulation, so it's different from seeing in that regard, but that's also the case for most of seeing. So I'll try to illustrate that. Here you see the old beta movement phenomenon of Wertheimer. So you just have two squares, two frames that are presented in alternation. And when you see these two frames, you see a square moving back and forth. Now, if we change these two frames a little bit by introducing this Kanizsa square here, at the time where the square is absent, then suddenly you don't see the red square moving anymore. You're seeing it's two red squares stationary, and you see the Kanizsa square moving. So this means that the perception of motion of the red square is not direct, it's indirect inference. So that's one illustration of many illustrations that shows that, yes, amodal completion, it is the same as seeing, and that involves indirect inferences. You can also think about depth perception. There's no direct sensory stimulation of depth. It's an inference. The retina is two-dimensional. And so there's much evidence for this. The next point, in vision, you have an immediate experience that it is there, immediate impression, and it's also effortless and autonomous. And that's also the case with amodal completion. This is a very nice demonstration by Alba Bergman here. You see all these fragments on the left, they're there on the right. But now you see these, and they seem to be there behind the inkblot. And you don't have to think to see this. You see it immediately. It's effortless, like vision in general. And then seeing and amodal completion is independent of conscious beliefs and knowledge. And illusions are like that. This is the Shepherd illusions. These two tables are exactly equal, the tops, but they look very different. But even if you know that they're exactly different, they still look, even when you know that they're equal, they still look very different. And that's the same as with amodal completion. Even though you know that this is an octagon, it still looks very different. And here, even though you know it's not a long finger, it's two fingers, it still looks like one finger. So here again, seeing and amodal completion are the same. Has functional consequences within perception. Here you have Kanizsa's demonstration. This is our demonstration of the same thing. Seeing the backside of the ball has functional consequences for how you perceive your own body. Here's a very nice demonstration of the same point by Shimoyo and Nakayama. Here you have this crescent that seems to move back and forth. It's exactly the same over here. But here it's perceived as a disk that is not moving due to amodal completion. So amodal completion influences motion perception. And the final point, seeing has this immediate experience of visual qualities. Many people say with amodal completion that's different. That's the basic definition, that it doesn't have visual quality. But I've tried to convince you that actually in some cases it does have that. So that will be a longer point. If you look at the definitions of amodal completion by Michotte and Kanizsa, Michotte says the term amodal has initially purely negative significance, since it indicates that the absence of visual qualities, luminance and color, from the completion of the figure. And then he says, on the other hand, it should be stressed that the impression of the whole shape and the unbroken character of its contour is entirely compelling. Kanizsa says something similar there, amodal completion, visual, without the chromatic attributes of visual. And that's brightness and lightness again. Now I'd like to go into some work done by Tom Scherzer, asking some interesting questions about this. Generally, you can see here in the Kanizsa triangle, you have modal completion where you have subjective contours here. You experience the white triangle as directly visible. But if you think about the black triangle here and the Pac-Man here, which you also perceive as complete, that's amodal completion. And they seem different. You have modal completion, that's experience of visual qualities, and that seem to represent unoccluded areas, like the white triangle. With amodal completion, there's no experience of visual qualities, and that represents occluded areas. That's sort of a standard assumption that's often many researchers have, but we don't think that's quite correct. And that's based on work by Kanizsa on this thing here, called observations, which he called phenomenal expansion by amodal completion. If you look at this figure and that one, this one looks slightly larger. And that's strange. Why should it do so? If it was amodally completed behind this object, there's no reason why the visible part should look bigger, but it does. And this is a modern variant of it introduced by Palmer and Brooks. Also, this one looks slightly bigger. It's the same phenomenon, presumably. They call it the occlusion illusion. Palmer and colleagues argued in favor of an explanation of this in terms of what they call the partial modal completion hypothesis. They say that the visual system somehow fills in a thin strip here along the occluded border, and the occluded object is perceived as though it were less occluded than it actually is. This is a very weird proposal, and they admit this is something paradoxical about this. It's a very interesting observation. Now, we've made a similar observation, which we think is more powerful, that illustrates this in a more provocative way, and that's this illusion that you can see here. You have this rotating sector that covers some dots which are there. Now, the rotating disk becomes gray, so you don't see it as different from this round. And now the part is totally different. And the directly visible part corresponds, the opening corresponds to the distance between two dots. So you can never see more than two half dots. But your experience here, when we have the red occluder, is you see much more than just two dots. And you experience them as directly visible. And this is what we call the visibility paradox. You perceive the angle of the occluder approximately veridical. So it means that you see more than 360 degrees of the disk as directly visible. That is the paradox. We investigated that in this manner. We had the occluded ring here, and we had the rotating disk, and people just adjusted a stationary comparison stimulus to see how much of it was directly visible. And what we find is this shows the amount of overlap that we have from our experience. So we see this in almost all of these cases. There is significant overestimation. So this visibility paradox is real. Now, this is almost like an impossible figure. There's a lot of that in vision science, like Escher's paintings or the Penrose triangle. It's inherently contradictory. So here, this visibility paradox is that we have if we have a physical situation where we perceived a certain part of the visual scene as visible, the occluder, and also what's behind it as visible at the same time. That's paradoxical. That should not be possible, right? In terms of physics, in terms of perceived, this is just what we perceive. So how can we explain that? Now, our explanation is just to get rid of this assumption that phenomenal visibility is a representation of optical visibility. So the standard would be that, yeah, if something is directly visible, you would experience it as visible or as modal. And if something is occluded, you would experience it as invisible or amodal. Our idea is here that the phenomenal visibility is a representation of the conclusiveness of the sensory evidence. And this idea, it's also inspired by things that Palmer said. So they had a similar notion, and we just expanded on that. And these are the blue arrows here. You go from strong sensory evidence to the phenomenal experience of visibility, and from weak sensory evidence to the experience of invisibility. Normally, when something is directly visible, you do have strong sensory evidence, and therefore, by theory, you get experienced visibility. And if something occluded, you normally have weak sensory evidence, and if you experience it as invisible. But in some cases, like with our rotating disc, it can be occluded, and you can still have strong sensory evidence. It was just a second ago. And therefore, the strong sensory evidence evokes the experience that is directly visible. That's the theory. So we resolve the paradox by saying that this is about the conclusiveness of sensory evidence. And that can be strong both for occluded and non-occluded. So therefore, it's not a paradox. So the implication here is that phenomenon of visibility is not a representation of things being directly visible or occluded. It's a representation of the conclusiveness of the sensory evidence. And if you start thinking about that, you open up new avenues, because the conclusiveness of sensory evidence is a continuous variable. And it can also be different from different aspects of perceptual attributes, such as object unity, contour, shape, texture, color, and lightness. And that means that the phenomenal visibility should also be a continuous variable, and that it can be different from different aspects of the visual experience. So if you look at the definitions again here by Michaud, in the second part, he says it should also be stressed that the impression of the whole shape and the unbroken character of its contour is entirely compelling. And that's what you see in these demonstrations. Well, why not say that shape is also a visual attribute in the same way as we say that brightness and color is a visual attribute? We would say it is. Here is a very interesting demonstration by Kanizsa. Here you have some red squares, and then you take away the amount of red by expanding these squares so that they become discs. So there's less red on the right here. But if you look at it, is there more red on the right or on the left? There's more. On the very interesting demonstration here. So with this in mind, you can ask, is it really true that visual qualities such as color are absent in amodal completion? So this was my final point here. There are cases where actually in amodal completion, you do have an experience with visual qualities. So in the final analysis, there is no principal difference between amodal completion and seeing, which is also what makes it a very potent factor in magic. So in our perspective, originally, you would think there are two categories. Things are occluded, yes or no. And depending on that, you have even modal completion or amodal invisible completion. In our theory, it's somewhat more complicated. Things can be occluded, no, yes. And completion can be experienced as visible, no, yes. Classical amodal completion is in this corner. Modal completion is in this corner. But we have this third category where it is occluded, yes, but the completion is experienced as directly visible. And now there's a missing category here where things are not occluded and you have no experience as visibility. Well, we think that Kanizsa's bridge or virtual contours is an example of that. Here you see a nice contour, a shape. Here you see a triangle. It's just some dots, but it makes an interesting presence there. And he says these virtual lines run from each dot to the other and cross homogeneously stipulated regions. Although we cannot say that we see them in a literal sense, they are phenomenally present and more real than merely imagined or thought connections. You can see that very clearly here in this demonstration. Here you see more like a diamond or a square, and here something round. This is not about thinking, it's an immediate impression, just like perception. But there is no occlusion here. This is an even more impressive demonstration. So Kanizsa pointed to this. This is the Ursa Major, what you can see at the sky. And if you look at that, what you perceive is this shape. Immediately you think about it as a wagon like this, but you can connect the dots in different ways. Why don't you do that? Well, they are excluded because you have the visual impression of these virtual lines. So this is not experienced as visible, the completion there, but it is present in much the same way as amodal completion, but there's no occlusion. So this fits the fourth category here. We can say this variable is, I said originally, well, it's completion experience is visible, but that's not quite correct in our terminology, because in these cases, we would say, well, there is form, and we'd see form clearly, and that's a visual attribute. So in our theory, you would have to say the color and brightness completion is experienced as visible here, but not as visible here. We also have the Jabini illusion, which is quite similar to these cases. Very interesting way. You see this octagon or sextagon here. We cover it by triangles in different ways. You get the impression as very different shapes. And interestingly, these illusions, they don't refer to the amodally completed figure, but you can see it as in the directly visible parts that there's something different about it. We don't think it's exactly the same as this, but it's also interesting in this way that amodal completion influences modal experiences. So, yeah, I think I'll skip that. So how do magic tricks work? On a very general level, magic tricks work because people are unable to imagine what is really going on. The experience of magic is things we cannot imagine, which are possible. So there are things about the world that we cannot imagine. And there are things about how we perceive and think about the world, which we cannot imagine. And this failures of metacognition, thinking about thinking, that's important in many areas of magic. And there are failures of visual metacognition, think about magic. It's also very important in amodal completion or anything. But this is something we can change because we can learn and we can study, and our thinking can be different. But then we have failures of meta-perception. And this is something that cannot change. Perceptual completions look real, but they are actually the results of indirect inference, which in some cases can be wrong. They also continue to look real even when we know that they are not. So I'll just illustrate that. So it looks real. You know everything about amodal completion. And it's just like this. Huh? You know, but it still looks. So this doesn't change. And that's important in magic. And this is a quote from Walter's write-up of his Kanizsa Lecture. He says that Kanizsa was fascinated by phenomenology, which he viewed as a kind of serious magic. So I think a very important thing that Kanizsa did was he taught us a lot about things about how we perceive and think about the world, which we cannot imagine. Would you imagine you can get this triangle for just having some Pac-Man and some lines? Would you imagine this? Or would you imagine that taking away color would lead to the impression of more color? Would you believe that you actually see hidden things? Would you believe this? So our main sort of new thing that I've tried to present today was this idea that by doing research on magic and trying to make basic vision science about that, you can apply it into other domains like traffic safety. But there's something missing here, of course, is Kanizsa, which influenced us in so many ways in making us sort of receptible to looking at these things. Oh, this is interesting phenomenologically, and we can apply that. So there's a big thing that's difficult to imagine, that somebody like Kanizsa could, a long time ago, an artist, experimental phenomenology, he can do things in his basics research, which maybe 50 or 60 years later results in a really applied research. So that's, I think, a very important thing. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd also like to thank all my wonderful magical collaborators. Yeah.
Thank you. It was an amazing presentation. And I have a very specific question about one of the illusions you presented, the one of the dot under the moving wedge. And so the illusion, it's really, really compelling. Works. It really seems to see more than one few dots at once. But I was wondering, besides the modal completion, whether there could be a role of the persistence and after images of each dot, because you see them for a very limited time, but they may persist perceptually. So do you think there's any role of that in inducing the kind of perception?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And there's been a big debate. This is related to the phenomenon of anatoscopic perception. And there's been a lot of debates about that. Some theories say it's retinal painting, like persistence that you say. So in our study, we were very careful about controlling for that. So I think we have some of, yeah. You can see it in the figure here on the right. See? So here you see the amount of error, and the white bars here are for the amount of error with the occluder. And then we measure the same thing without the occluder. So you get some error, and that's visible persistence. But critically, that's the black bar here. That's less. So it can explain some of the extension, but not all of it.
Thank you. Lovely presentation. So, and lovely demonstrations. And on the terminology, I still have to digest something. I'm not sure what meta-perception is, but I'll ask a different question, more like specific on this example we have on the screen. So I would think that nobody would claim that the part of the ring that they see overlaps the disk. Would they? Do they claim that there is an overlap between the two objects? Otherwise, that goes against the idea that they're actually seeing more, and it's the actual visibility. The alternative would be, after a while, I could have something maybe more related to boundary extension, and I'm reporting more. But that doesn't mean that I saw, because if I had to see more of that ring, it would have to be, you have a problem of why is not overlapping the gray region?
That's a very interesting point. Yes, I agree. I don't think people ever reported that. I don't see it that way myself. So the paradox is between how much you feel that you see, and still you have this impression that the gap is smaller than that in some interesting way, but you do not see it as the hidden part as occluded, I think. So there is something interesting there, for sure. Yeah. So it's when we ask people this question, there are two separate judgments, and they just don't add up in the whole. But it is, if you look at it, there is something a bit curious about it. But yeah, it's not directly. Yeah. Yeah, certainly there is a time course. So with this demonstration, I made it in a way which produces a very strong version of it. There is some repetition that sort of seems to boost it, also make it stronger. So there are many variables that can make it stronger or weaker, but I think that are variables that also influence the conclusiveness of the sensory evidence. So the time course is part of that. Yeah.
Just a comment about the vocabulary. I enjoyed very much the lecture because there were two words missing, which almost always, well, it appeared once or twice here, representation and inference. In all papers you find them, not here. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, of course, these things are important too. But yeah, indeed, I didn't mention it.
Stereokinetic effect is interesting from this point of view.
Stereokinetic. Oh yes. I think, yeah, that's a good suggestion. Yeah, it's definitely a very interesting related phenomenon. So yeah, I have to think about that, and it could be very interesting. Yeah.
Question that everybody asks you in applied psychology is, so here is the problem. You illustrated the problem. What is the solution? Did you work about solutions, how to make occluded things visible?
Well,
in the car,
yeah,
when you are driving, because it happens frequently that you don't see because you cannot see,
yeah,
and you underestimate the frequency of those events. They are very common, actually.
So we didn't ourselves work on solutions, but there are different sort of suggestions of things you could do. One thing that, a simple one that I suggest, if you can just make them thin enough, like 6 centimeters, for people who have 2 eyes, that's sufficient to solve much of the problem. But there are other sort of things that are being discussed. You could project. You could have a camera that projects what is seen outside of the car onto the A-pillar. That's one possible solution. You could also use artificial vision to issue warnings if there's something in the blind zones. But these things, there exist things like that for blind zones on this side. They often have this problem of false alarms. So after a while, people don't pay attention to them anymore. There are different things you can do there. If you want to go really far, if you look at the F-16s, they have a canopy, and it's for a very similar reason, because the frames would occlude things. So there are many things you can think about technologically to solve this. It's a question of money and priorities, and I think our research, the results of that would have implications for where should you focus your effort. Currently, we think, well, it should definitely be something, or a good idea is to think about how you fix the cars. There's probably more chances of success than educating drivers. There has been some attempts at educating drivers, which there has several difficulties beyond the thing that is cognitively impenetrable. Also, if you would do the right thing, you would look around the pillar, but you need to do it all the time. And even if you move your head, it could produce the occlusion if a person moves in the same. So, and there has been accidents by bus drivers in the US, quite a lot of them, and where they have tried to train drivers. But if you do this for 8 hours a day, that's a big problem. So we think there are good reasons for focusing more on what can you do with the cars.
It's an asymmetry.
Yes.
You know, you are the driver. This is the pillar, yeah?
Yes.
And I am the pedestrian, and I'm typically far away. So you don't see me, but I can see you.
Yes.
Because if I am far away, your body is not occluded. Yeah. So I can think that because of a modal completion that you are seeing me.
Yes.
That you are able to perceive me. Because I see your body. I cannot see your eyes, maybe, but I see your body. But the reverse is not true, because I am, as a pedestrian, completely occluded by the pillar, and you cannot see me for a long time, especially if the movement of the pedestrian and the slight movement of the car are synchronized. So we must also educate pedestrians, I think.
Yeah, that's
and teach them that
yeah.
They are invisible.
Yeah, there is some literature generally on this thing that often road users like pedestrians or cyclists overestimate.
Yes, they overestimate being invisible.
Yes, and that's a very important issue. So yeah, I think that's a very good suggestion here. But you also need to keep, there's a lot of research on what kind of interventions really help when you try them out, of educating people in traffic. And one important criterion based on a lot of different research that emerges is that if it's something that it's clear situations, when are you supposed to do this? And when do you know? So there's a clear sign in the environment, I have to do this behavior now. If it's something like that, things tend to be effective. And if not, tends not to be effective. And if it's something that you can police in some way, then it tends to be. But if it's difficult to police it, so that's based on a lot of different research on interventions. So there is a certain worry that even if this sounds like a very good idea, it might not work in actual practice as much as you would want, so that you would need to have focus on other solutions, like, for instance, fixing the cars. Yeah, but it has to be tried out still. Yeah.
Any questions? More?
One thing also got the visit circle you can bring out. I will teach your friends and try to explain. For me, it is possible to explain. Do you have this position? Do you know how to explain that? Yes, no. Can you explain this? Or I guess that's a reason. But it says, it is the short. We accept. It's something that you cannot put together.
I can explain what is really going on.
How? You can.
So if you think about this, it's really the this one
Is that
is another
the letter D? Yes, the bigger.
and it's easier to imagine what happens there. So that gives you some intuition. It's easier to understand why this happened.
Right?
You might still have to. That's sort of one way. And then if you think about it, and say map, that these two knees go into each other. That wait, that the table forces me on because so that's makes it easier to imagine what's good. But even then, so you still don't know why you said that psychology. It's
Yes, that's
I don't know.
yeah, but it's important. But like people can remember that since state kid. Yeah, because you have the idea that two rings cannot be painted. Yeah, it's against penetration as a value there. But that's great. Thanks so much. Yes.